Well, as people are coming in, our call, welcome to what promises to be a very interesting discussion about an important subject. Among many other uncertainties, AI is on everybody's minds these days. Some are hoping that AI may enhance our productivity. Maybe we have to work a lot less, or at least the labor and skills shortages can be addressed, and capacities of our economies can be expanded. But it could also be the case that we will all be replaced, or perhaps even enslaved, and well, on that regard, I don't want to be too negative. I do have an important anecdotal evidence, with which I will start, because here at the Berlin Center, so we usually talk to you online, but there's a physical OECD Berlin Center in Berlin, and we moved some time ago. Uh, and now there's a dominant provider of online maps that almost everybody uses to get here or to other places. And as it turns out, when you ask for our new address, it will send you to our old address. And so I'm not sure that's AI. I'm actually not sure. Maybe it's just digital, but for sure that doesn't make us more productive. And it cannot really be solved because there are no people you can contact to solve the problem. You just have the possibility to try and correct this online, but then for that you need two-factor authentication. And the two-factor authentication we're being offered is a landline, actually, that doesn't exist anymore. They want to send us a text message. Anyway, it could go in all sorts of directions. So I'm very happy that my colleagues, Peter Gall and Boris Konet, are going to present some research on, well, what AI could do to the productivity of our economies. That's Peter's part at the beginning. Boris will then show some more precise research on a particular OECD country, Israel, that has interesting AI policies. And after that, I will have the most expert of expert panels that you can imagine, which I will present after these initial presentations. So, Peter, you have the floor. I don't think you will solve my problem, but you will give us some overview over the macroeconomics situation, AI, and productivity. Please.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. It was a great scene setting. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about what we did on this topic. It's a vast topic, and we don't, promise to make justice to many aspects of it. But at least the benefit aspects, the aggregate macro effects, that's the part where we try to contribute a bit because there's a lot of expectations. So let me share my screen. Hope it will work well. Yeah. Okay. I think it's good. It should be good. Thank you. So yes, I'm fitting the introduction that Nicola was mentioning. Miracle or Myth. This is the title of our paper, which looks at the artificial intelligence and productivity growth impacts. So this is joint work in our division based on many papers actually with several colleagues. So let me start with the first. Yes, so you might have heard about a lot of anecdotal evidence about how AI can boost productivity at specific tasks, the worker level. You might be using it on your own time for personal use or also for work. And it turns out there's not only anecdotal evidence, but now more and more academic evidence, seriously done, randomized controlled trial studies that test whether if you give one worker the possibility of using these large language models, how does that worker compare in terms of the speed of completion of the task, the quality of the task that they do with other workers who don't have access to such AI. And this has been done in a number of contexts. Here we collected a few studies that were done in the past 2-3 years in a series of fields. So let me start on the left here. So this is customer service agents. This was done by Eric Brynjolfsson and his colleagues, and it's published in a very prestigious journal, Cornell Journal of Economics. And they measured the impact of having access to large language models in the context of customer service agents. And they found very significant effects, even more so for less experienced workers, around 17% boost in terms of the number of cases they can handle in a given amount of time, thanks to AI. This is the first result on the left. then you have much larger impacts. I mean, this is the task where you tend to find the largest impacts across a series of studies. This is software coding, programming. So there, these studies identified around 50% performance gain by using artificial intelligence, the coding, aspect of artificial intelligence, large language models. So either they were completing many more tasks in the same amount of time, or they reduced the amount of time needed to complete a single task. So either time reductions or increases in quantity, they turn out to be around 50% boost. And then there are other tasks where this was tested, professional writing, business consulting, even general writing, and so on. A series of countries, mostly focused on the US though, but there are some exceptions in Asia and the United Kingdom where they found effects around 30–40%. So these work level impacts of the latest Gen AI are quite promising, quite impressive. These are large numbers. But of course, going from the micro level to the macro level, the whole economy level, this is a difficult question. I mean, there are a lot of tasks that are not covered by current generative AI. They're not impacted by current generative AI. So perhaps that's why there are very mixed views in the literature about the potential impact of AI at the macroeconomic level. So here we collected a number of studies that looked at the question, and initially there were mostly private firms or banks or consultancies who looked at the issue, and they tended to be quite optimistic, promising performance gains of around 1.5% productivity boost per year over the next 10 years. Most of these studies look at the future in the next 10 years. It's a convenient horizon because you don't need to focus too much on the short run, which is uncertain because there's adoption cost and adjustments, things like that. No, neither in the very long run, which is uncertain for different reasons, because AI can also help with innovation. It can totally disrupt the economy. So the 10-year horizon has become a standard in this literature. And if you compare that the predictions over 10 years and you analyze the gains, this is what you get across a number of studies. So Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, they're saying around 1.5 to 3 percentage point gains per year, and some academics, Bailey, Brinjof, and Korak, they find similar or they find them plausible. And then there were that was the big shock with Darin Acemoglu, the Nobel Prize winning economist, who looked at this more seriously using a task-based framework, which we also adapted in our work. And that resulted in much more pessimistic assessment, around 0.1% boost per year. And there are a number of studies in between, namely Agion, who also tends to be somewhat more optimistic, even though he uses Acemoglu's framework. And to put these into a broader perspective, how do they compare with the previous large technological wave that was most visible in the United States in the mid-90s due to ICTs, computers, and the internet, where researchers identified gains around 1 to 1.5 percentage point boost per year. So if you compare AI's potential impacts to that, they are significant, but they're not surpassing it substantially in most predictions. But they show that the magnitudes are somewhat comparable, especially when you look at the more optimistic predictions. And here on the right, we show our main scenarios that I will talk about in a minute, how we came up with those. So in our main scenarios, or in all of our analysis, we consider that AI gains come from three sources, and here we build an Acemoglu's framework. There are the micro-level gains that I showed you in the beginning, the first line. The second is exposure to AI by sector. So what is this fraction of tasks that AI can do nowadays? And the third is adoption. What is the fraction of firms who are using AI on a regular basis? And you multiply these three factors and you get a sectoral level productivity boost of AI. And then we feed it into a sectoral input-output based generative model to take account of sectoral reallocation and price adjustments and demand. I'm not going to talk about that part today too much. I'm going to focus more on the intuitive segments here because they give a lot of leverage also for policymakers of how these gains can be boosted. So the second component I mentioned is exposure. What is the share of tasks that AI can help with currently? And here we're building on a recent science publication by Elondu et al. It's partly OpenAI employees, partly academics, who looked at each detailed task in the United States ONET database and evaluated to what extent each task can be done with the help of generative AI, large language models. And then we translate these task level exposures into a sector level. And we see that in mostly manual, physical intensive sectors, agriculture, fishing, manufacturing, construction, the share of tasks where AI can be helpful, current AI is quite low, 10 to 20%. But on the other end of the spectrum, with knowledge-intensive services such as ICT services, telecom, finance, publishing media, professional services, accounting, and so on, the share of tasks are quite high, reaching around 50%. This is the average for G7 economies. We can do it country specific, which is important because also the share of these activities by country vary a lot. So the expected gains from AI are to a large extent driven, of course, by the sectoral composition of our economies. And there, given current AI capabilities, US and the United Kingdom are leading the pack. And other countries where manufacturing and manual-intensive activities have a larger share, Japan, Italy, and Germany, the expected gains of current AI seem to be lower. Then the third component I mentioned is what is the actual use of AI? So exposure was covering what's the potential share of tasks where AI can be helpful, but the question is it being actually used? And this depends not only on capabilities, but also their cost effectiveness, the user friendliness, and so on. And how do we assess this, especially in a future-looking sense? What we thought of doing is we looked at historical trends in previous major technologies such as electricity, computers, and the internet. We call them general-purpose technologies, it's called in literature. And we looked at their adoption path over time, following the user-friendly breakthrough in each of these technologies. And we trace out the adoption path going forward. And then we select certain scenarios for AI based on whether AI will follow more the path of electricity, which results in 23% adoption in 10 years' time, more the internet and PCs, which result in 40% adoption, or perhaps something even faster, mobile phones, which are more user-friendly. And some can say that AI is indeed now becoming very user-friendly. So you can expect an even faster adoption rate than what happened with internet and PCs, which required a lot of infrastructure to be in place and learning to use those tools. Compared to those possible future outcomes, the current adoption rate of AI by firms, according to official Census Bureau data in the United States, are quite low, stand around 5 to 6%. But they are increasing at a fast pace. So that's interesting statistics to watch, and also in other countries. When we combine these three factors and we do them country specific, this is the final picture we're getting. In terms of the expected gains, the United States result reflect what I showed in the second slide, but now we're adding a third scenario, which is the mobile phone case, and there we see the largest effects because of the sectoral composition of the country, and also because of the adoption rates are currently the highest, and we expect these differences in adoption rate to continue and be enlarged over time, as it was the case in previous technologies that we saw in mobile phones and others. Initial adoption rates tended to be the ranking of adoption across countries tend to be relatively stable over time. So that's what we project. But of course, this all depends on policies. Let me go to them. A few levers that we identified from this work. Of course, one element is the development of AI, how capable AI is, so that it can impact more and more tasks in a more trustworthy manner. So the AI OECD has worked a lot on developing AI principles, which are conducive to having more capable AI. And also on the adoption side, we have a lot of levers that one can think of, skills, infrastructure, and of course competition in the AI sector, so that these models continue to be produced at accessible cost and at higher quality and more diversity of model offers. And then we had another set of results about the reallocation part that I didn't touch so much, but the idea here is that AI will likely entail a lot of reallocation across sectors of activities. Some sectors will grow, some sectors will shrink. Those sectors who will be automated a lot, they might expect to be shrunk a lot. So policymakers need to facilitate this and make sure that labor and capital are allocated to the places where they are more productively used, and also there is demand for those activities. And I just stop here because I'm conscious of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now over to Boris, to the Israeli example. And while we're waiting, in fact, AI already seems to have taken over the chat, but we'll see whether that perdures. You're not unmuted for the moment, Boris.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you, Peter. And so, after this overview of the general effects that can be anticipated from AI, I'm going to give you a few insights about how at the OECD we are rolling out this analysis in a concrete case, the case of Israel, and how we turn this into policy recommendations. And my hope is to convince you of how interesting the specific case of Israel is. And then in the discussion, you will be able to hear more as well from Dr. Ziv Katzir, who is heading the National AI Program in Israel, who has been one of our main interlocutors in doing this work. So many thanks to him for a lot that I'm going to present today. Before we jump to the rollout of AI, I'd like to say a few words about the production of AI, because Israel, despite its relatively modest size in terms of population, with close to 10 million people compared with the populations of the large AI-producing countries, starting with the United States, is a key player in the field. If we look in relative terms like this, you see that in particular in the early stages, startup creation, and then the attraction of venture capital, Israel is really a very gifted player with a vibrant VC funding scene for AI and an extremely dynamic startup creation ecosystem. Here you see the same numbers, but in absolute terms, without dividing by population. And when you look at this, you see that in terms of attracting venture capital, Israel is in the same league as countries like Canada or France. In terms of startup creation, the same applies. So there is in the country very lively process of creation of AI that it has not happened from nothing. It has emerged from the high-tech sector, which in Israel employs 12% of total employment and produces more than a fifth of GDP. So it's really a very highly productive sector. This buoyancy of AI is related to this base of resources from the high-tech sector, but also to a favorable regulatory environment, and I would say even a regulatory approach. The fact that the regulation is flexible, it is not done from an overarching point of view, but it's done sector by sector, so that the search of trust is made compatible with the realities of the business in each sector, and also through a dialogue between the regulators and the companies and the academic laboratories that are advancing the research, so that the regulation can adapt to the realities of the production of AI. This is a really important source of strength in Israel, and in the review, something that we emphasized as really worth safeguarding. A key input of artificial intelligence is human intelligence. And so for that, the higher education system is essential, especially in areas such as mathematics, statistics, physics, of course, computer science as well. And when we look at the positioning of Israel there, it is indeed in each age cohort of young graduates equipping a relatively high share of young people with degrees in these fields. So this is important, but at the same time, keeping in mind the strength of the sector in Israel and with a view to preserving it for the future, there is scope to do more. It is especially the case then going at the level of masters. The production of AI quite typically requires advanced skills that are acquired at the postgraduate level with masters or PhDs. And there, if you zoom in on mathematics, statistics, physics, ICT, which for AI are the most relevant for illustration. The rest of science and technology is also showed on this chart, but there are areas that are more further afield from AI there. There, Israel is below. That can in part be explained by the specificities of the lives of young people in Israel who go through a 3-year military service for men, a 2-year military service for women. So that raises the opportunity cost then of the master. But still, it remains an issue and an area where the OECD recommended expanding capacity. Talking about capacity, the infrastructure base, not only the digital infrastructure, but the general infrastructure to host the growth of companies is also a pillar of growth for the high-tech sector and for AI as such as a result. And there are really infrastructure gaps in Israel that need to be fixed, because not only is the stock of infrastructure relatively low by comparison with other OECD countries, but on top of that, Israel has an extremely strong population growth. It's really an outlier within the OECD. And so as such, it will need also not only to build infrastructure for the existing population and its economic activity, but also for the future. And this infrastructure will also be helpful for the diffusion of AI through the economy. It is a bit difficult, admittedly, to compare the rollout of AI in Israel with that in other countries, especially in very recent years, because the survey of AI adoption among firms had to be delayed in Israel. But it is on the low side, even if we do the same as what I'm showing here, which uses the latest data for every country. We compare only in 2020, which of course is old for AI, but there were other forms of AI, other than generative AI, that were already heavily used in that period. Israel is behind, and it's the same for digital technologies more generally, and it's actually the same for productivity in general. The counterpart of the statistic that I gave before, that 10% of employment is generating 20% of output, is that there is a really big productivity divide between the high-tech sector, which is at the global frontier, and the rest of the economy, which is lagging behind. And so I wanted to show here the situation of skills in the Israeli economy compared with other OECD countries, using what is called in the latest wave of the OECD survey of adult skills, adaptive problem solving, which is the one most relevant for the take-up of digital technologies and artificial intelligence, where you see that, yes, Israel is clearly below the OECD mean. So this emphasizes the case for skills. There is a need to improve the education system. And there, if we also look at the OECD survey, but this time of educational outcomes at the age of 15, and there we disaggregated by stream of education in Israel, because the education system is divided to a large extent between different kinds of school. But first, the first thing to observe is that all of them, the non-religious schools that use Hebrew as a language, the religious ones that use Hebrew as a language, they're below the OECD median and quite below the OECD top. And then the ones that use Arabic language are below the lowest performance among the OECD. So when all of these are taken together, the average performance is clearly below the OECD median. And actually, in practice, there is a further thing that needs to be mentioned, that there is a segment of the population, 14% of the population, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, who have another system and they don't take the test that is here. And from the time they enter middle school, the boys in particular have very little education in mathematics and English. Their education is concentrated on religious subjects. So if they were sort of estimated and added to this chart, they would arithmetically also drag the average below the OECD median. So there is a massive education challenge that has to be closed in terms of the quantity, yes, and quality of education, and that is for the average, but also for specific population groups where particular efforts need to occur. And I'm not going to go through that slide. I put it here because it is repeating things that I said, more to say that we have additional recommendations and that you can find more of them in the survey of Israel that we published at the beginning of last month in Jerusalem, and which is freely available on the OECD website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boris. And I'm already really glad that we chose Israel as one example, because it seems to make the point or illustrate the point that Peter had before. Can you take down the slides, Boris? That adoption is key to the role that productivity, that AI will play for overall productivity. But before I continue and delve into the discussion, let me present my wonderful panel. We have Joanna Bryson, who is a great expert for digital technologies, AI, and its governance in particular at Hertie School here in Berlin. Welcome. We have Jonathan Fourer, who is the CEO of Just AI, and that's a French startup that's helping other firms to adopt AI technologies and try to be more productive. So he's really a practitioner. Bonjour. We have Anna Dujic, who is in the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs here in Berlin, has worked a lot with the OECD on AI, productivity, and the impact on the labor market. She's the Director General of Digital Work and Society at the Ministry. Hi, Anna. Good to have you. And we also have Gaston Fernandez, who is a researcher at the University of Leuven. And he does, his own research on productivity and AI. So it will be interesting to hear your perspective, Gaston. And finally, last but not least, we have Ziv Katzir, who heads, we already heard it, the National Infrastructure for Research and Development in AI in Israel. So he can tell us more about this particular issue. And I think before I go, so I already said, probably everyone has seen it. AI seems to have taken over our chat, and we already had a further chat on my grievances with AI, but we're not going to do this now. I think in a first step, Gaston, I'm going to ask you, because I found this interesting in Peter's presentation, that he said, everything, we don't really know, a wide range of estimates. So it will be interesting to hear your estimate, but of course, that's all very uncertain. I would like to ask you whether in your research, you basically have the same conclusion that everything will depend more or less, I'm sure on the type of AI we develop, but also then on the capacity of an economy to adopt these new technologies. Is that the same conclusion that you have? And where do you see, why is there such a wide range of estimates? And where do you fall into that range with your own research?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks a lot, Nicola, for the questions. And also thanks a lot for the presentations. I think they were very interesting and also very precise presented. So basically, what we have regarding macro estimations, right, is for the moment kind of very speculative type of estimations based on plenty of assumptions. And this is mostly given because we don't have data about long-term data about the productivity gains of AI. So basically all these models, macro models, need to be estimated on a set of assumptions that make their predictions kind of speculative. Therefore, we have like this large heterogeneity in estimations. Where my research comes from is more from the micro perspective. So what I have seen in the data is that there is in fact some productivity gains in firms in Germany mostly. And this mostly comes from the way in which firms are using the AI. And in particular, what this micro research tell us, which basically in the end fits back into the macro models, is that despite the hype around the AI's potential for productivity gains, what is really important in this regard is to create task complementarities, in the sense that automation of subtask in production processes can let workers or firms to specialize in other tasks. And this task complementarity plus the generation of new tasks is crucial for it's crucial for observing productivity from AI adoption. So in this regard, I think although these macro expectations are quite some optimist regarding these gains, if we don't see in the future these task complementarities and also the creation of new tasks for workers, maybe the productivity gains won't be expressed as much in GDP measures, let's say.
We're in Daron's scenario then, basically.
Yeah.
Well, good. That's interesting, and I think that's well. There, I want to bring in you, Jonathan, because Gaston said, well, when he looks at German firms, it all depends on how, well, if they're adopting AI and how they're adopting it. So, is it complementary? Does it expand their capabilities? Now, you're helping. My understanding is you're helping firms to adopt AI. And you're promising that they will gain productivity. So what, from this practical perspective, what is important so that productivity gains will actually happen? Oh, there's a slide, another slide.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation and for the question. Yeah, I put the slide just for people to understand what we do and how we help companies in Europe and in sub-Saharan Africa to adopt AI. And I think what the leverage are for companies to adopt AI, as it was mentioned earlier, is first the training and getting people know more about AI. It's not only about higher education. It's mainly also making firms employees and collaborators know a little bit about AI. Just not to be afraid about it, about replacement and stuff, but getting to understand how it can bring more value, maybe free some time to focus on higher level and higher value tasks. So I think that's the first point. And then, and I know we have experts for digital adoption and related topics around the table. I think one other point is right now, people are asking more and more about AI, but what they mean most part of the time, at least for our customers, it's first really short-term results. So it's mainly about digital adoption, about solution for automations, and most part of the time, it's not only about AI. It's first getting to know more about IT system, optimize it, and then later get to adopt AI for some parts of the topic. And we know that, and we see on the market that companies know more and more, within the last 3 years, and by the end of 2022 with ChatGPT, companies started to investigate about their use case, prioritize them, and when we get to know them and to discuss with them, they already have some topics prioritized and they know a little bit about how AI could change it. At least they have a feeling about it. So I think the first point to address it is to make people understand what is AI and what are digital automations, the difference between them, so that they know more about velocity of adoption. And then we can move from very short-term results for automations to mid-term and long-term strategy about AI adoption across all tasks and teams.
Okay, perfect. And I see it's mainly big, or at least there you show big firms. So is it different for small firms? Is it more difficult for them to develop this plan and benefit?
It really varies across sectors and companies' size. For most part of small companies, they're already using some tools such as NA10, Make.com, Zapier for automations, and they get to know more about AI, especially leveraging existing APIs for companies that are already, have IT teams and knowledge. But even from people that are not very technical, we see more and more adoption about, easy to access tools. So even people that don't understand how the AI work already use it. And this is a shift for me in terms of, training needs and stuff. It's not only about getting people know more about how it works and how it is built, but how to use it and how to leverage it for short-term ROI. And this is really a shift that we observe for small companies, but also for mid-size and big companies. It's they are not waiting to know very in details how the AI works. They just figure out some examples and they say, okay, let's use Gemini, my Copilot, and other tools like this.
Okay, thank you. Can you take down thanks, yeah. Ziv, I think I will definitely also come back to your startup scene on the one hand, and then a little bit this, let's say, this duality and the Israeli economy later. But now I have actually a question that, that came up for me during the presentation that Boris made, and also with respect to what Jonathan just said, because Boris said, "Oh, it's a problem. There are not so many." Advanced degrees, STEM degrees in Israel. And and my question is that really needed? Well, for the AI adoption, I'm sure it's for the AI development, but you seem to be doing well there. Well, first of all, I have a former colleague who does research who found, at least for the moment, that the returns to AI skills that may have been acquired completely informally, somebody, following tutorials in the internet, are starting to match those from higher degrees. So that says something about their utility, presumably, on the market. And I also remember from my work in Israel a long time ago, we talked about the Orthodox community and how the men at least don't learn a lot of math, etc. But at the time, we did visit sort of a boot camp where women from the ultra-Orthodox community, who usually, I think, traditionally became teachers, they learn coding, and it seems to work very well for them, and they can, integrate into the market. So, long question, but what I want to know, what's your vision? What's your take? Why is it so difficult with this really great startup scene to see the benefits in the more traditional parts of the economy? And is skills, the advanced skills, really the main bottleneck here?
So a wonderful question, and thank you for having me today. I really want to start by saying thank you to Boris and the wonderful OECD team for the experience we had with you constructing this biannual report, and especially the AI chapter. It was enlightening, it was helpful, and got very precise insights that we can take forward and establish policy by. So with that, I'll address your question. I think it is extremely correct that the vision you made between adoption and the process of manufacturing AI, creating AI services, products, R&D. So those are essentially two very separate processes that influence very different parts of society. adoption has to do with many of the things that were mentioned here. The cost of implementation, the ability to assimilate skills into the global population, the ability of people to trust technology, the ability of technology to be complementary as opposed to replacing people, and so on and so forth. And this is, for a large degree, a prolonged process, right? If we track the charts that were presented early on today, the optimistic people say it's going to be 2% gain year over year. And so it's a wonderful gain, but still it's 2%. It's not like a leapfrog or something as we are used to seeing in technological areas. And now addressing the issue of talent and the need for advanced academic degrees, I think this is really an interesting question. Israel, for once, was blessed. We got an infinite flow of talented people that can do software. It came from the academic institutes, it came from the military service, it came from, like you said, all sorts of boot camps and processes that we promoted throughout society. But AI is different. If you want to be the creator of cutting edge, globally leading AI, you need masters and preferably a PhD. So all of a sudden, you need like a 12-year journey before you can be any good at it. You need a master plus 3-4 years of hands-on experience, perhaps working side by side with someone that has already completed this process, let's say 5 years ago with a master. I always envision the case like with it, this is a craftsmanship, right? So you need to be an apprentice for someone that is being a master for a long period of time. Otherwise, you'll be just implementing something that was already invented by somebody else. And therefore, you will not be able to compete. You will not be able to justify the high salaries that are associated with this line of work. Same as in medical teams, right? Doctors need to study 10 or 12 years and nobody asks why, right? There is simply too much to study. Whereas all sorts of assistive professions within the medical care arena, they have shorter period of study. So I think, at least for now, the academic discipline for AI is so deep, it's so broad, and it's changing so quickly that you simply have to have an advanced academic degree. It's a problem for all AI manufacturing countries, and it's a specific problem for Israel, as Boris mentioned, due to the compulsory military service and due to the temptations that are already found within the labor market following shorter training passes.
Nicola, du bist muted.
Sorry, I was muted. No AI intervening. Anna, I wanted to ask you, since you're also sort of a AI policymaker in the field, and in fact, you helped craft the German AI strategy. I saw that Germany has a higher share of STEM graduates actually than Israel. On the other hand, certainly not as strong in the startup area, where the AI that Sif just described could be created. So yeah, how do you see where the German economy stands now in terms of seizing the opportunities of AI, and where do you hope this will lead, perhaps thanks to your strategy and new policies?
Thanks for bringing us all together today, Nicola. Good morning from Berlin. As most of you know, Germany is in some kind of economic pickle. We are struggling with our productivity and our growth rates. And therefore, as a large economy that lacks natural resources, as well as has an aging labor force, we are heavily dependent on the smart use of technology. Which is probably the first good news I'd like to share. Until recently, the public debate in Germany was circulating mostly around like fiscal instruments for initiating and activating growth. This has changed. We have a much more informed and ambitious debate on how we can smartly use artificial intelligence to boost our productivity. The second good news I'd like to share is that also thanks to the research that we have undertaken over the years with the help of the OECD, we have managed to increase the adoption rates of AI among our labor force. Right now, roughly 60% of German employees are using AI in their daily work. But, and this is the problematic aspect of it, the reskilling and upskilling within companies is happening mostly informally. So we have not yet reached some kind of informed and organized process that is enabling the majority of our companies to quickly understand and adopt artificial intelligence for its business models. Right now, almost 20% of our companies on the average are using AI. The leading companies such as Bosch and similar ones have an adoption rate that is exceeding 50-60%. Where we struggle are the SMEs. We have parts in Germany where only 10% or even less of the SMEs are adopting and using AI. And the reason why particularly the SMEs are struggling with it are threefold. We literally lack experts, particularly in non-urban areas, which are the areas where most of the SMEs are located in Germany, particularly in the south. We have high costs of implementation and not sufficient public instruments for specific investments in AI adoption. And also the majority of the SMEs simply lack the knowledge which kind of technology is most suitable for their respective business model. So what we are working now at in this relatively new German government, our chancellor has been inaugurated only a couple of days ago, is that we are trying to concentrate on the one hand on integrative instruments for the support of particularly SMEs, so investive instruments, but also instruments from the field of the labor market. We will be heavily investing in the skills initiative. And last but not least, we will take a closer look with our European partners at the complicated field of regulation, because bureaucracy is also a problem that is hindering AI adoption. Our view as Ministry of Labour has always been that we need a set of clear rules, particularly when it comes to privacy rights for employees. But it's also very clear to us that we need to make the adoption of AI as uncomplicated and as easy as possible for our companies.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Anna. And now I will turn to Joanna, who's already been very active in the chat, and she has confirmed that the productivity of my physical meetings is a victim of AI, actually. And an AI somehow that dominates me rather than work with me. So she says Google Maps is an AI, and it fits a question that I think I want to give to you because you're, well, such an expert in digital in general, but AI as well. A very good question from the audience who says, what do we actually mean by AI? Is it the latest version of LLM models? Is it something more? I should know the answer because I convened this talk, but I have to admit that I'm sometimes a little bit confused myself. I have the impression that often we now use AI whenever we mean any IT digital device. Probably the the definition is something like, well, you're working with machines that can sort of work by them, learn by themselves. That was my understanding, but you know much better, Joanna, so you will help us with this definition. And then I would also like to hear from you a little bit about the downsides, or perhaps not the downsides, but I know that you're very much, and you showed it in the chat, you think that really we need to decide how we develop new technologies. We need to regulate it a little bit. So, you know, people can find my office still, even if AI is intervening. So I would like to hear more about that.
Right. Well, specifically, thank you for having me here. Thank you for this really interesting panel and the incredible talks beforehand. I look forward to getting the slides. I hope that those are shared too. Let me start with the Google Maps thing. That is one of the things, Google is a form of recommendation. It is absolutely, you know, this is what we used to be taught. AI is search. But notice it's not an AI. Google Maps is a whole bunch of people, the guys who have the phone number that you're not getting. And so this is what the Digital Services Act is about, is making sure that, at least within Europe, within the EU, I should say, that we're able to get an answer on the phone, and we are able to know why things are ranked. And we were particularly concerned about political advertising that might be affecting democracy and things like that. But in general, about fairness and exploitation of people. So yeah, regulation is a way to grow the public goods. It isn't just a way to hamper things, and it is a way. And I think I'm so excited. I'm sitting on some data right now, but it hasn't got to peer review, so I can't talk about it. But actually, we are seeing an enormous explosion of growth in the EU since the GDPR. And so if anyone here is working on the GDPR issues at the moment, please don't hurt it. Okay, so let me get back to your actual questions. I actually had a couple of comments coming from this. I think one of the really overlooked cases of AI, and this goes back to the broader, okay, so in fact, I'm sorry, I will answer your question more about the difference between generative AI, which is a subset of all AI, by posting a couple of links. I've blogged about this too, so I totally get why you're confused about that. And I do think the change of definition of AI towards only these large language models was a linguistic thing that was pushed upon us during the period of consolidation of the legislation in the AI Act in the EU. So this is a little bit of us being victims of realpolitik, as well as this new technology, which is of course extremely attractive, and is, I think, the main thing we've been talking about here when we saw the slides about AI improving productivity. A lot of that is actually talking about large language models helping people do certain kinds of administrative tasks faster. However, I want to go to this overlooked case, which is Germany's response to the invasion of Ukraine. Specifically, the world's third largest economy was very much invested in trying to keep Russia as a part of the European community. And so we were using only Russian oil and gas, right? And then when the invasion of Ukraine happened, we didn't want to send them money anymore. And Schultz said, can we, brought in the captains of industry, can we cut this off? And they said, no, couldn't possibly do it. Somebody cut it off. The Nord Streams were blown up. And in only 6 months, we changed the entire way that we did. I mean, okay, we're still using fossil fuels. We're using liquid natural gas. But it was an incredible accomplishment. It wasn't just putting in some ports and putting pipes all over the whole country. It was every single company changing the way it did its business process. And it was the people, the whole people, not only the companies, reducing their energy costs by 20% for one winter, okay? So this level of flexibility, to me, says AI. This is our logistic capacity to address an extremely dramatic event. And I think we don't realize the extent to which we could be improving our productivity. I think partly because it would create so much entropy. That's such a scale of change, right? But I think we have this incredible capacity right now of handling logistic challenges, and we need to go in and do it carefully and really work and cooperate on the governance outcomes of that. So I want to, I will come back a little bit when another thing in response to the talk just before me, when you say that not every company is using, and here you probably mean generative AI, do realize it's an exposure, right? So another thing that we're worried about, speaking of geopolitics right now, is if somebody cuts off access to Microsoft, right? Or OpenAI, or whatever it is you're using. So there is a big question about, or indeed your fighter jets or things like that. So there's a big question right now about kill buttons and digital sovereignty and things like that. But from what I've heard from both within, and now this is sort of like stuff I've heard in chat and real context, but both from German policymakers and French policymakers, they've been very impressed by the German strategy and the return on investment. So France tried a little too hard to look like an American economy, which is weird, incidentally, it's overconcentrated. And Germany worked really hard on trying to ensure diffusion across the economy. And they both the French and Germans have assessed that the German strategy is better. So I think that it's great that we're trying to get this diffusion, but we have to be conscious that, like look at Spain, we may just lose electricity sometimes, but also we might lose access to certain providers. And we need to look for a diversity of providers if we're looking at these large language models. So I think that's one big thing. And now, as long as I am a professor of ethics, I will also come back a little bit on the demand, when we were talking about how is this impacting everybody. The studies that have been done so far, and not by me, Christian Dustman has done some of this stuff. James Besson has been fantastic for this for years. But the recent studies looking at least Northern Europe, again, Germany, Netherlands, places like that, the uptake, the companies that have been investing most in AI have tended to keep 75 or 80% of the people whose jobs they've replaced, quote unquote. They put them into higher, actually more cognitively tasking jobs, and they pay them a little more. But there is a falling away of certain, which I, having been in Britain for a long time, assumed it was the people that are the lowest performers having to reapply for their jobs, but it wasn't. It was actually the oldest people. And it's not clear if they have chosen not to re-educate themselves, because you do have to go through new training because they have a limited time left in their horizon. They don't want to do that. Or if it's the companies who don't want to invest in training, again, people that are only going to be there for a few more years. So there's a big thing about demographic fairness. And I realize I've talked for a while now, but I do want to really emphasize the importance of this. One of my biggest, so first of all, when there's automation, one of the things that happens, and we can look across history, it doesn't have to be AI. We see actually a surge in productivity because we've lowered costs, there's increased demand. Often we see a surge in employment, but it's not, the wages are often brought down. And that's partly because we don't recognize enough how much we should be doing redistribution. And we need to be conscious of the chaos that we create in our societies and in our economies if there isn't as much money getting out to ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And this is why I want to close. One of my big fears as someone working in AI is the dystopia we see of people not caring about some of the people in their own countries. And I include America with that right now.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you very much. Ziv, I want to take this up. So perhaps this the problem that Joanna alluded to in the end, that perhaps sometimes firms use AI, the introduction of AI to get rid of their oldest workers is a bit macroeconomically speaking, less of a problem for Israel. You're a very young country. But I want to come back to what Anna also mentioned in the chat. She said, oh, maybe a problem in Germany is the tech skepticism. So I think from this perspective, Israel is a very interesting example. So this duality of the economy, on the one hand, the very thriving tech sector, and I think you have a strong startup scene as well. But at the same time, at least that's what the economic survey says, it doesn't spill over as much to the rest of the economy. It's not being adopted. So I'm wondering, these startups, and scale-ups, do they work enough with more traditional Israeli firms, or do they turn abroad mostly? Why is it that it's not the entire economy that's benefiting from your thriving tech and startup scene?
So that's a wonderful question. I want to first, with your permission, address something that was mentioned by Joanna and Anna, and that's the structure of regulation and the way this affects AI development in general, and maybe also touch the question of who might be affected the most when AI comes into play. So maybe I'll start by saying it is kind of easy to guess, right, that older people or people from lower socioeconomic layers of society will get hurt by the introduction of AI. It's an easy guess. I can say that what we see in Israel is that the most intimidated group are the high-tech workers. They are the most intimidated group by the introduction of AI. They're saying, look, if previously you needed to go through all this training to become a good software programmer, now everybody can be a software programmer. So, right? So at least, judging where fear goes, this is the most intimidated group. And I'm not trying to make any predictions of the way it's going to evolve in the future, but just saying, we're in such a dynamic situation right now that it's really hard to tell how things will evolve. Going to the issue of regulation, yes, we agree that setting clear guidelines is key. We must keep privacy in place. We must keep competition in place. We must keep human rights and civil rights and so on and so forth. Yes, for sure. But we also know that we are in a kind of a twist point in technology evolution right now. And there is a huge amount of open questions with regards to how will this technology evolve. Some of the risks that we foresee right now will never mature. They will never materialize, and they're going to be just fears that technology takes a different turn and things evolve differently. Some of the things that we foresee, we expect to be fine, are going to mature as risks. And some things are going to develop the way we predict them to. And for us, this leads to the general guideline within Israel is to try and create agile regulation. And we do this by two key elements, I think. One that was mentioned by Boris is the sectoral regulation. We think that the cost benefit or risk benefit analysis of any AI implementation should be done in a sectoral kind of approach when you put content expert into the room, right? I always give this, of course, fake example and say, look, if someone had a grave case of cancer, and I would say there is an experimental drug that will most likely cure him, but there is a 90% chance that this guy is going to lose his hearing. Yes, sure. The entire audience here will say, yeah, sure, give him the drug, right? But what if, he just hurt his thumb? Okay, and now there's a treatment that will have 90% of making him lose his hearing. Of course, this doesn't make any sense. So this pictorial example is meant to say we need to judge the risks versus benefits in a very specific context-specific scene. So and therefore we go to the vertical industrial industry-specific approach. Second thing is to go for sandboxing, but we refrain of the term regulatory sandboxes, and instead we use experimentation sandboxing. And this goes to my earlier comment. And when you go to a regulatory sandbox, you practically say, okay, I've got a mature product. I think it's almost ready to go into the market. And now all that I have to do is to verify whether or not this product can sustain the requirements of the law. But what if we've got this immature technology? Okay, we don't know how to transform it into a mature technology. We don't know what the true risks are going to be. And we don't really know what are the most effective guardrails that need to be put in place. Okay, so now this is an experimentation sandbox. You put in the regulators, you put in the contact experts, you put in the technologists, you put in the companies that actually try to make a financial gain out of this entire exercise. And now everybody works closely together to test the technology, to allow it to mature, and finally to define the regulation that will protect us all looking forward. So this dynamic, agile approach is what we're seeking when we try to allow AI to fulfill its potential.
That sounds good. Very smart. Gaston, I have a question because you looked at German firm data, right? Micro level data. And I wonder, have you looked at also at the impact on the workforce? So what kind of workers might have expanded capabilities or might even leave the firm? Is there any evidence you can provide?
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks a lot for the question. So indeed, so for these German studies where I have explored the impact of AI, we have kind of looked slightly what are the characteristics of the workforce that are mostly affected, and it has to do with, of course, like the least educated part of the workers. But this, just as a caveat, because these studies was pre the Gen AI sort of upsurge in the economy. So basically, what research also tell us is that there is a clear distinction between pre-Gen AI and post-Gen AI on who might be the workers mostly affected. And actually, what research nowadays suggests is that actually with the Gen AI applications, workers that are in the upper part of the skills distributions can be potentially be more affected with this type of applications, such as use of ChatGPT during the work hours to let's say automate some easy writing tasks. And some suggestions there in the research is because now like kind of the elite type of expertise is put it available for type of workers that do not have access to this kind of specialized expertise. So there is kind of a clear distinction between what is pre and post Gen AI and on the effects for workers.
Yeah, that's interesting. That maybe now the entire audience is scared because they're no, I hope not. We shouldn't be scared. It depends on us. But perhaps, Jonathan, I would like to hear from you because, well, you're working with firms in France, you said, but also Africa. And you know, and we saw Daron Acemoglu's numbers before, and he basically argues, if I summarize very very simply, it's well, it all depends on how we use AI, and there's the possibility to develop AI in a way that it can expand our capabilities. So even when Gaston says, "Oh, you know, it can do some simple writing tasks," I think, "Oh, that's great. It will do all my emails, and uh, I can focus on the thinking, and perhaps even in contexts where people have low literacy or something, but they have some other skills, right? And can the AI then help and with basically expand their capabilities, make them more performant where they're not so performant, and then they can use the strong part of their skills and develop more? What kind of applications do you see right now and coming up? And does it then differ for Sub-Saharan Africa or France? What could be most beneficial?
Yeah, sure. So first, I think that one of the difference that we observe from France and other countries in Africa would be the approach of AI. As I mentioned earlier, in France, SMEs and stuff, we observe that people are really open to start from scratch. You know, getting rid of part of their IT system and starting over using new and up-to-date AI-based tools, and they're willing to do so. From what I see in other countries like Ivory Coast and Togo and countries like this, they're more starting from what exists right now, their IT architecture, their IT systems, and try to build on top of these systems. So of course, we may see some exception, but this is the feeling that I got from most part of our customers right now. And for your question regarding use cases and skills evolution and area and tasks, as you mentioned, it's not only about tech people. It's also affecting marketing, digital agencies creating media and other kind of assets for digital marketing and things like that. We see that right now more and more assets are easy to create. You just have to ask ChatGPT to create a one pager for some topics, and you got it. You can create video from scratch, and more in the last weeks, you can create videos with sound on it, with lip sync and people talking and speaking about topics that you mentioned. So for this kind of media creation, it's really huge success. And for tech people, I see more and more use case when you ask AI to create other AIs. And I think this is like second wave of use. People already
Meta
manage
AI.
exactly like you're entering the matrix. You're asking AI to create other tasks, and it's already the case from tech architecture. You're asking for a draft or some IT software and solution, even if you're wrapping AI or just using your own. It drafts for you the IT architecture and diagrams, and then you can ask to go further and within each part of this diagram, go deeper and ask for another generation. It's exactly the same for non-tech people asking for ChatGPT to help them build new prompts and expertise prompt. Like, okay, give me how I can speak to you in a more effective way. And we see that trend getting more and more known by people and stakeholders. So that's really interesting to know and to figure out, the shift in AI understanding and how to use it. And people are getting more and more about using AI to better discuss with AI.
It sounds great, but it also sounds like it can turn into crazy loops. I don't know.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we try some experiences where
Yeah.
we ask the AI and some LLM to behave like a human and asking us to behave like a LLM. And that's kind of crazy what kind of use cases you can get.
Anna, now that we've talked about this expansion of capabilities, and similarities, but also differences between Israel and Germany. Obviously, it's the startup sector that you probably would like to be stronger, and that we can talk about. We have our own webinar about this, but in particular the aspect of aging. So Joanna said, "Oh, maybe it's a risk for older workers." I always thought, well, if done rightly, now couldn't it help us? And that's the discussion, of course, in healthcare, in even administration, maybe many tasks can somehow be automated, and that's not a threat, that's an opportunity because we know we're going to have fewer workers. So of course that's the dream, but what can you do in terms of policies to make this happen rather than another scenario where ChatGPT asks me to behave like ChatGPT and I do it or something, I don't know.
Well, Nicola, I agree with you that we need a more inclusive look at the whole of labor society when it comes to using the technological possibilities that AI offers us. Specifically here in Germany, within this new government, we are trying to target 3 groups. The older parts of our labor force, women, but also impaired or handicapped individuals that have been excluded or disadvantaged by the current circumstances in the labor market, and that would have much more to offer when assisted with AI tools. So we are not there yet with our programs, but we are working specifically on ideas addressing an increase of digital skills among the female part of the labor force. Also because we want to politically target the danger of new inequalities when it comes to the use of AI. We firmly believe in the productivity effects of AI, but we want also women to participate in those productivity effects. And as a heavily aging labor society, of course, we need to think about how we can motivate and encourage our seniors in using the technology. And in this context, we have to take a closer look on how we can easily reskill and upskill them, and how we can also motivate them to really also embrace this new technology as some sort of new opportunity also to maybe develop for their last 5 or 10 years before retirement a whole new approach to their own work biography.
Before I want to turn, we're almost close to the end, but have some time. I think I want to briefly go back to you, Jonathan, to this question, because you said, well, it's not always advanced degrees, but training on the job too. And then, of course, Ziv, he made clear that it's mainly about the creation of AI, where you will need a lot of training. But I'm just wondering, to come back to this, and when in your work helping firms adopting AI, do you think training on the job can do the trick in most of the times, or will there be some workers, and is it mainly the older workers who are not willing, not able? What do you observe?
Oh no, I don't see any differences from the way that people get AI opportunities and ROI based on the age. There is absolutely no difference, and on the opposite, we can get young people being afraid and old people eager to test and implement because they see more about short-term ROI, and they also have experience about other transition. We see earlier in Peter and Boris' presentation that we compare AI with internet and electricity, and we have people that knew, 2000 internet bubble and things like that and events like that. So they try to compare this with AI, so they're very much more comfortable with this trend. And for what about training? Let's say that most part of people right now are already have a job and can't get to higher education again and can't get trained for a year or two to get to know more about AI. So we see a lot of people available for like 1 week training shared between several months or 6 months program with 2 hours a day training sessions and things like that. And I really think that getting AI to business and to operation and integrating to society has to deal with this kind of training of already employed people, because it's most part of people right now and they can get to school again. So we need to make this thing happen.
Yeah, but it does. Thanks, Jonathan. It just as another anecdote, it reminds me that you have to be also resilient to failures when you adopt new technologies. Because my father, he adopted the internet with, I think, almost 20 years delay. And this is because he adopted a predecessor, which was quite successful, a great penetration in France, Minitel. Was called BTX in Germany, and nobody got it. And so he was alone. And then when the internet came, he said, oh no, it's not going to work. It's going to pass. Anyway, Peter, you've always been, well, you gave a great presentation, and then you were sort of overtowered by the natural intelligences we have on the panel. But I did want to ask you, because Joanna rightly said, AI, and you did it too. It's general purpose technology, AI. It's big, right? It's going to bring big changes and of course, winners and losers. And then my question to you is how important it is, in order to think, about the success, more productivity gains, to really think about the societal impact, labor market impact, regional impact, you have it, you name it. how important is it to think about this, and how does, I know you're mostly concentrate on the data, but how does the OECD take up this call for being conscientious of what happens to people and make sure that well, large parts of the society can benefit?
Yes, thanks for the question. Very interesting discussion, by the way. And so about the going below the macro effects, basically you're asking whether these differences across regions and the labor market groups will affect the macro level. So we haven't looked at this question in detail. There's a lot of work by our colleagues in the employment, labor, social affairs, and science, technology, innovation who look at the more granular picture behind it. But what I can say is we have one insight from this is that the larger the differences are across sectors, the more likely that the aggregate gains will be somewhat diminished through so-called von Moll disease effect, which basically means that if you automate a large segment of the economy and if it's very, very productive, then the valuation in the eyes of consumers that will go down. So the price of that output will go down and the aggregate effect ends up being lower. An example for that could be consider that AI is now being used in a lot of legal services. There are some recent studies that find 100% productivity increases when used by some legal analysts in certain tasks. So if legal services will get very automated, it will result perhaps in a large drop in the price of legal services. For the aggregate benefits, it's a question whether consumers will react to it and in what ways. Will there be enough demand for using more legal services because legal services is more abundant and more cheap? Or there is a limit to how much we want to use it. Because if there's a limit to how much we want to use those activities that AI helps with, then the aggregate gains will end up being limited. So the share of legal services will shrink in the total economy, and we will be dragged down by the other segment, which is not being helped or automated by AI. So in that sense, we do have this insight that the more widespread the gains are across activities, the larger the aggregate effects. And if you have very concentrated effects, very large effects, yielding to large automation and not much consumer demand for those activities, then the aggregate gains tend up being lower.
Okay, great. And we are past our time, but I have 3 little questions that I will ask. And I ask you to be brief. I'm sure everybody is getting hungry now after so much food for thought. Boris, I just briefly wanted to ask you, because you've worked on Israel for such a long time, and you said you think it's a great example. What's the one part that you remember that you say that will be interesting to remember for almost every other OECD or other country from the Israeli experience? Is there something you can put your finger on?
Thank you, Nicola. Well, great question. Yes, for AI, for me, it's this point that Ziv actually referred to about half an hour ago, which is the co-development of concrete regulation at an early stage between the firms and the regulators. I thought this was quite remarkable. Then it comes with a question, if it is taken as a lesson, because to what extent can it be scaled up to much larger economies? I leave this as a question.
Great. And so, Anna, you talked about, and rightly so, about some of the risks, of course, of AI. But if you have to name the one dream you have and a positive vision of AI, what would it be? Okay,
I'm gonna come to that in just a second. I do want to say one thing about Germany. I really want to come back to the wages as a danger, but then I'll turn it on its head as a one thing about Germany, which US has also suffered, is that we went through a period of paying ridiculously high wages to semi-skilled laborers. And if we lose our incentive to do that, and we really have a very big problem with the Chinese competition, so even if we're incentivized to do it, we maybe can't do that anymore. How do we get that much money back out into the communities, right? It's just absolutely essential, both from a human rights perspective and from political stability perspective. So I just want to remind that as an issue as we think about all these redistribution by wages. I'm most positive about the stuff I mentioned before, that I mean, our biggest threat right now is the climate crisis. It's a sustainability crisis. This is something that we really can be a lot smarter as a consequence of. And in particular, I'm thinking about again, given the current context, we're having trouble with trading with some of our largest partners, how we can take the things that we've learned in the EU about harmonizing trade between different countries and expand that into some kind of a much more global set of treaties so that we could rapidly, agilely put together trade agreements with large numbers of companies and help lots of countries, lots of countries come online even more than they already have been. And there has been, I think it's under-recognized, explosion of the success of the liberal democratic goal of individuals all mattering, right? So that is creating some of these global instabilities we've seen because we're not used to that. but I think we could see it even more. So I'm just super excited because AI helps us solve logistics. And so, you know, and we're seeing the first movers have sometimes been doing this in a nasty competitive way. But I think if we need to get smart and we need to work hard and do it in a way that actually benefits everybody.
That sounds great. And now I don't know whether that's a dystopia or what it is actually, but it's if I'm going to ask you about this. Somebody asked in the chat, oh, what's the probability of AI, that AI will be anthropomorphized? I'm not even sure. I don't know, probably a mix between humans and AI. I don't know. Do you look into this? Well, if you don't have much to say, you can also, because you nodded when Diana said, you know, the climate crisis, and maybe AI can provide some solutions. What are the big societal issues you look at when you're directing R&D of AI in Israel?
So to be brief in the favor of time, I think that AI brings forward a new toolbox that allows humanity as a whole to solve the most difficult problems that we're trying to solve for 30 years or something unsuccessfully. So climate definitely being in my top three, then food security, right? Energy, health, right? The global population is becoming older. It consumes more health services, and this becomes impossible for any government to sustain for a long period of time. And so now we are having this magic bullet that can potentially help us create better healthcare at the same price. So I'm very optimistic about the potential to society as a whole from AI. Having said all that, people often ask me, okay, Ziv, what do you expect to happen within 5 years? And I keep saying, guys, I don't know. We're in the middle of a remarkable change. And what we need to do is to be agile, to monitor things, to make sure that the more problematic parts are being taken care of and the opportunities are being grasped. We need to be agile and dynamic.
That sounds great. Let's be agile and dynamic. For sure, this was an agile and dynamic discussion. Thanks a lot to Anna, Gaston, Ziv, and Jonathan, and also Peter and Boris, who stimulated us at the beginning and came in towards the end. Thanks to all the people who contributed in the chat. So we will share the recording, but also the slides will be sent to you. It will all be on a little website, but also all the studies that had been mentioned in the chat. So if you weren't able to copy it or whatever, don't despair. If you didn't have an AI to assist you with taking notes, you will be able to come back to us, and we'll come back to you with AI and other subjects. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much to all.
Very nice day.
Thank you.
Grüße, Adam.